let's talk about Alien Covenant. So this film, Prometheus, came out 5 years ago. Now, Ridley Scott said in the wake of of Prometheus that he wants to keep making more. He had hoped to make 3 more films. Now, Ridley Scott, right now, everybody is 80 years old. He has been making films for a long time. It's nearly the 40th anniversary of Alien. So his parting, gift to the earth is going to be these Alien films. This is cementing his legacy. And I give the guy a lot of credit because he is making current, kind of thought-provoking films in an era when superheroes and fast cars are kind of what are reigning supreme. It's not science fiction's heyday right now. So he is giving us, kind of a throwback, but his films look great. I was pleasantly surprised with Alien Covenant. Carl, what were your thoughts on Alien Covenant walking out of the theater?
My thoughts were that I love the fact that James Franco burns alive within minutes of screen time.
Head scratcher number 1, yes.
Yes, the big plus. I was very disappointed that Elizabeth Shaw's character wasn't in it. I think that was supposed to be the general idea, and because of the town of Hollywood, it just never worked out that way. Like Van Halen, I think they struck gold twice because the female, I guess, lead in this one, Catherine Waterston, who plays Daniels, was perfect.
She was awesome.
If you had to replace Elizabeth Shaw with somebody, she was perfect.
I almost liked her better, actually. She had a much more Ripley-esque way about her,
Very much more Ripley-esque, where Shaw was an archaeologist, right?
Yes.
She's an egghead, but she's a bookworm, and then Waterston here is like a crew person. She's not like military. She's just like, I don't know, a contract. I have no idea what you call her, but she was great for it. So I'm not necessarily mad. It's like we get Sammy Hagar instead of David Lee Roth, which is still doable. But I did want to see Shaw in the movie. David's character. First off, Michael Fassbender playing 2 androids that look alike that are completely different did a fantastic job. But the you grow to really know this David character is one sick creation, and the rest of the crew was good. There was actually a really wonderful video. I think it was called The Last Supper that you could see like on YouTube, which it wasn't movie footage, but it was the entire crew of the Covenant before they set out on their mission. They're having like a dinner. And it was a really interesting and unique way to kind of preview a movie and do an introduction to a crew without it actually giving away any of the film, because none of it was in the film. So that was pretty cool. And I liked the crew, the way the crew was put together. Whatever little complaints I have about this are really just greater storyline type complaints. But when I walked away from this movie, I walked away thinking like, this is what you would want out of like a prequel to Alien films. Used aliens very sparingly, just focused so much more on this crew and the implications of what this black stuff is.
Well, and so speaking of black stuff, let's get down to it. Let's talk about this film. So it's 2104. So it's like 15 years after the events, or not 5 or 6 years after the events of the last film. So the ship Covenant, interesting name for a ship that is seeking to terraform and kind of set civilization afoot on a new homeworld, is en route to a new planet. And there's 2,000 colonists and a bunch of embryos on board. And this crew is looking to essentially set up a colony somewhere. Now, this crew seems unaware of the events of the last film at the onset. David's there, but it's not David. It's another David. It's a newer, better David. David doesn't know about the other David. David is David, but he's a better David, a newer David, an improved David. It's kind of a nod to the Bishop character from, Aliens. So interesting, Carl, very much echoing the original Alien. There is a nearby neutrino burst, and basically the crew wakes up and they receive a radio transmission from an unknown planet. and they kind of argue amongst themselves and decide they're going to go investigate. So, where have we seen this before? So, what were your thoughts on the open?
Yeah, the opening was good. I think, when you open a movie with a crew in crisis type of thing, I know that a lot of people respond to crisis kind of according to their gifts and their personality. So I think it's a great way, again, to introduce a crew of people, is that they all have to fast get out of this, cryogenic sleep and figure out what's going on. So essentially, while the ship is recharging its batteries, it extends these big giant solar panels, solar sails that are designed to collect energy and convert, radiation and convert it into energy. There was a phenomenon, a neutrino blast, set stuff on fire, screwed stuff up, killed, wonderfully murdered James Franco, so we don't have to deal with him in this movie. And everybody gets up.
Which, P.S., why would you get a big A-list actor like that for a 30-second role? What was that all about?
I'm just starting to think that there was a lot of people who wanted in on this film who really liked the film because, again,
Gotcha.
Danny McBride isn't right for this film at all. He did okay. I still don't think he was right for the film, but he did okay. But so anyway, yeah. So there's a new captain now. He's a strong man of faith. He's also a complete idiot, and he's going to be kind of leading the crew now. And what they find is this transmission from this planet that's not the planet that they're going to. It's too good.
That was the problem. Yes.
Yeah, too good to be true. The planet. Before they set out on this mission, they do long distance planetary surveys and they find this is the best one. Let's go check it out. Well, here's a planet that they do their close little scan of. Looks perfect for human life. Was not shown up on any of their long-term planetary surveys before they left. So there's disagreement between the new captain and then our hero. Well, I guess it's supposed to be our hero, Catherine Waterston, over whether or not this is the right route to go. They choose this one because it's way closer. It's 2 weeks away as opposed to 7 years away, and that's where they're headed, and that is the juicy start plot of the film, is that, we're going to this new place where we don't know where anything is, and then we're going to check it out.
So Covenant, gets to this planet, begins orbiting it, and they send an expedition team down to the surface. And, while they're looking around, they realize that the transmission signal was coming from a crashed alien ship. Now, Carl, where have we seen this alien ship before?
Jim, this is the alien ship, at least the design of the alien ship from the movie Prometheus.
Ooh, there's the tie-in. So, but while they're walking around, wouldn't you know it, there's these freaking microscopic spores. And the spores begin infecting people in the party as they're walking around. So, it isn't very long before they realize that people are getting sick and they need to get back to the ship and basically get these people back into medbay. So why don't you talk about this whole scene, because this kind of leads to the very the first xenomorph looking character and the first of many deaths to come. And can you explain to me again why people weren't wearing helmets? I'm very confused.
Well, they weren't wearing helmets because it's an oxygenated environment, and
yes, and that was the thing with Prometheus. But I'm sorry, why wouldn't you just wear a freaking helmet? What if a coconut falls out of a tree and kills you? Put the helmet on.
Jim, if in the United States, in fact, in every civilized country on this planet, if we even remotely suspect that somebody is sick with something, we don't let them near anything sensitive. We quarantine people. It doesn't make any sense that you would just start walking around an environment like that without doing some sort of studies of the oxygen or the the life around you. I think it seems incredibly silly that a ship designed to carry healthy people and embryos someplace is going to be so clumsily surveyed by the people in charge with taking him these places. You watch where you step, you mark things, you take samples of things while protected, and then you study them until you think it's safe to go around. So it's kind of extremely silly, the carelessness that was going about it. In fact, you would figure that a ship like this, and maybe we're overthinking it because that's what geeks do, but you figure a ship like this would have two types of crew. You would have crew that's designed to fly and maintain the ships, and then you would have a crew of scientists and doctors on board, and that they kind of work, intertwined with this goal. Don't we now? Is every astronaut military, or is it like a mix of military and civilians?
I feel like it was mostly military.
But like today, like is every astronaut
today.
like part of the military, or is it like a mix of military and civilians?
I think it's a mix.
Yeah, you would just figure that, you know, you have those two goals. You've got to get a ship somewhere, and then you got to maintain these healthy people. So anyway, two guys get infected by these spores in very similar fashion. And by the way, the scene where they show that's incredibly cool. Yes. And then out pops from these two people a much faster, more nimble creature that's actually called a neomorph. This is not the alien that we're used to seeing. However,
not at all.
We're getting close to seeing it, though. You know, in Prometheus, we see this thing called a deacon. Now it's this thing called a neomorph. Neither of these names are mentioned. I'm knowing this because I'm a nerd and I did my homework. And then it messes some people up. It's ripping people's jaws off. Walter, the android, loses his fist to some acid. It's tearing people apart. They're shooting at it.
That acid scene was interesting because you're seeing that all of these creatures, despite their shapes and abilities, have that kind of acid blood and that exoskeleton thing. They all kind of have that in common. So it very much seems like the environment and the host are the X factor and the shape. Now, I'm sorry, go ahead and continue.
Yeah, and I also like to point something else that might be very small, but these are details that geeks notice, and this is why we do the podcast. The eggs that hatch the face huggers from the other Alien films are laid by a queen alien. It's interesting to me that the creature in Prometheus, the creature in Prometheus that planted the embryo into the engineer at the end of it was a creature that came birthed from a woman, somebody who gives birth to, you know, a creature. The implanting creature came birthed from somebody, and I do kind of find that interesting. And I don't know if they're trying to show trends that I don't think that the mutagenic properties of this black goo is supposed to be completely random. I think that, you know, there are hosts, and then there are things that create hosts, and I think that's kind of a vibe that they're going for. In this case, these spores created these creatures, and they go around, they jack some stuff up, and they manage, I think, to put one down, but they can't get the other one, and out comes some new person. David. He shoots a big flare in the air and scares everybody away. By the way, so far by this point in the movie, they did notice that this planet's not only very oxygenated, but it does have vegetation on it that you would also find on Earth, like actual, not like an alien version of it, but actual wheat and things like that. So anyway, David shows up, scares our neomorphs away, and promises, in the form of body language and strong words, promises some form of safety. So leads them now away from the battlefield, so to speak. By the way, that scene where the shuttle gets blown up. Frightening, man. It's scary.
Oh yeah,
and totally cool. They bring they bring the first infected guy back. He hatches this neomorph and just screws up the ship, screws up the two crew people on it, and it gets blown up. It's awesome.
So this begins the part of the film where David and David are together, and Michael Fassbender. This isn't the type of film that will get any sort of like Oscar nomination or anything, but he puts on a clinic here. He's essentially playing the same thing, but it's genius. And his acting in a lot of these scenes is amazing. But he basically tells the crew, kind of gives them a little bit of backstory, takes all the survivors with him and leads them to a city with just a bunch of dead engineers, it looks like, He basically tells them that, when him and, Dr. Shaw crashed on the planet, the ship accidentally, quote unquote, released, the black goo, and it killed everybody. And then Shaw died in the aftermath. Now, Carl, do we believe David? They have no reason not to believe him, right? He seems like a nice enough guy, but we don't really think that's what happened.
Yeah, from the first film, in no way did I believe that story at all. Not even close. And the how do I put this? You don't exactly know what David's angle is here, but he really kicked up the sinister and the creepy vibe by now really drastically kicked it up like a bunch of notches. The other android, Walter, played by David Fassbender, they do a great job kind of playing off one another. One thing that, and this film opens up with actually the opening sequence of this film is Waylon, the old guy who dies in Prometheus as a younger, an adult, but far younger, is actually turning David on for the first time and introducing David to the world and his creation. And you get a sense very quickly that Waylon kind of thinks himself as a god over this creation, and he wants to meet his own gods. And David's really quick on the uptake, and you get this observation David makes that Waylon created David. Waylon's looking for the creatures greater than he, but Waylon will die and David won't. And I think you start getting this vibe that David kind of is quickly putting together that he is superior to people. He is superior. I think that he thinks he's superior to most organic creation, and I think that's kind of a vibe that they're starting to get across, and I think they do a really good job.
Yeah, he's very infatuated. He has a god complex, a very clinical, cold, detached god complex that has become more developed over the in the in-between years here. So the crew and David, basically have to tangle with some more aliens. And, there's a very interesting scene where at one point, there's kind of, more bloodshed and carnage. And then, David's trying to communicate with one of these aliens. And he's like horrified, that one of the crew members kills it. And then he kind of admits, in the aftermath that, he's kind of the result, that he's been experimenting and trying to create a new species, which, P.S., you've succeeded, because here they are. And basically the crew decides that they're going to put, basically they don't know what to do with him, but he, as soon as he's confronted, he basically takes care of the confronters. So why don't you take it from there and lead us into what happens next?
Yeah, and you kind of get the feeling really quickly. So, obviously David promised that this place was safe. David lets these people kind of disperse, and I think that he knows full well that our new neomorph the available living neomorph can get into this place, kills one of the crew members, but allows him time to start communicating with this alien creature, and he's going into it, kind of a very self-involved, under his breath diatribe about how communication's key and things. He's obviously experimenting with these creatures and these people as it's going on, and like you said, he is confronted, and he explains essentially what's been going on. The thing about this scene that bothered me was it wasn't very well written. So I witnessed one of my beloved crew members' heads get ripped off by this alien creature, and this new android, who is creepy as hell, is trying to keep me or talk me out of shooting this creature, and is trying to communicate with it, and is horrified when I do communicate with it, and very angry at me. And I, distrusting of this crazy android person, let this android person kind of lead me around his creepy tomb, into a room full of eggs, which very sinisterly open up, and he tells me, "Hey, go take a look inside one of these. Get real close."
And then you do it.
I'm just going to do it, yeah.
Yeah.
And then out of this egg pops a classic facehugger alien, and within a very short time frame, either intentionally or based on a very, very poor establishing a context, out hatches an alien that very strongly resembles the xenomorph alien that we're used to. It's
this
actually
is the
close.
first hint of it. Yes.
Yeah, it's incredibly close, but not quite, as I've been educated on. This is called a protomorph, but we're pretty dang close to it being what we're used to seeing. So it's now out on the loose. Walter, the other android, has kind of figured this out, and he's trying to kind of confront David. He's looking for David, but our heroine here, Catherine Waterston, playing Daniels, while looking for her, her scattered crewmates, finds out that David is a sick MFer, and then David proceeds to try to screw her up royal.
Yeah, so while everybody's searching for, missing crew members, Walter confronts David, about everything. And David basically kind of explains that, humans suck, are very much inferior, and, I don't really think you guys should be allowed to colonize anything. Walter tries to, basically argue with David and then just decides to disable him. Or so we think. So let's talk about what happens next. So we finally figure out what happened to Shaw, or the crew does, right?
Yeah. So essentially, I think now this scene I don't remember if it's Daniels that figures out what happened to Shaw or if it's Walter. But essentially, we find out that David killed Walter. David killed Shaw. Jeez, oh man.
Yes.
So David, the android, killed the woman who put him back together because she's an idiot.
And experimented with her body.
Yes, with this black goo. Essentially, we find out that David's been experimenting on practically the entire ecology. He intentionally dropped this weapon on the engineers, and he's essentially been studying it, cross-germinating, trying to manipulate the creature into something so he can create something. He wants to be, what Wayland was to him. He wants to be the thing that creates another life, another creature. He considers himself this creator, this artist, this god, I think, is what he's trying to become.
The thing I don't get, is that he is already created. So it's like, you don't really know, like, what's the end game? What are you trying to create? Because you're obviously making shit along the way,
He doesn't know. He doesn't have a clue. He's crazy, and he's sadistic, and I think that he wants to create whatever it is that he thinks is going to be, like, the perfect creature, I guess, So, he was the one who had killed Shaw, experimented with her to kind of move this process along. Heck, maybe even she was the last piece, I doubt it, to making this facehugger creature. But needless to say, there's a big fight scene between David and Walter, and this is gonna, I guess, decide how the rest of the movie is gonna play out.
So David basically ends Walter, and there is a whole bunch of shenanigans with it.
You either know that or you don't, depending on how movie naive you are. I think that they tried to hide it. They didn't do a fantastic job.
I'm sorry. I missaid that. I meant to say that Walter kills David. You're right. The way for the film to work for the final 20 minutes, basically, you're led to believe that Walter kills David, and there's some more xenomorph shenanigans. But essentially,
that next xenomorph shenanigan you talk about is quite possibly the dumbest scene in the film.
All right, so
it should have been the best scene in the movie.
So why don't you lay out what it was and then what it should have been?
All right, so what was cool about the scene and was the protomorph, the progenitor, I guess, to the xenomorph, was running around the temple now, effing people up.
Yeah.
And David and Walter are fighting, and we are led to believe that Walter kills David and then helps Daniels escape with, I forgot who the other nameless person in this one is, and then Tennessee, played by Danny McBride, comes down on this mobile docking platform to pick everybody up. And then the xenomorph, protomorph, manages to get on this thing. Now, this is obviously a spacefaring vessel. This spacefaring vessel was designed to traverse space, go to a surface, and come back. Mm-hmm. So we get 15 minutes of them fighting this alien on this platform while Danny McBride, who plays Tennessee, is like the best pilot in the universe, can't figure out how to take this thing and fly it just upwards, on the hopes that if you just fly it high enough into space, this alien creature won't be a problem. They can't quite figure that out. So Daniels, in a very badass fashion, gets out on this platform and is trying to fight this alien. Now, somehow this alien manages to survive things that we know this alien can't survive. More specifically, this is a thruster on a spacefaring ship. I don't know how hot it burns, but we know that these aliens don't like fire. Crawls right over one, and Danny McBride, boosts the thruster and burns it, and somehow that's like no big deal. It's no problem. The thing's fine. But in a pretty unrealistic fashion, this incredibly fast-moving creature is somehow bested by a really slow-moving crane and crushed to death. And then all of a sudden, Danny McBride figures out how to move the ship upwards into space, and then they're, the alien's dead, and they're on their way to their ship, and it's just a monumentally stupid kind of scene.
So all the characters in play and what the eventual outcome is fine. It's the like you said, the 15 minutes of how it happens that is just like head scratchingly bad. It's meant to be the final climax of the film in a lot of ways, and I felt like that part of the film was just a little lacking. It was just kind of dumber and dumber as it went along. But essentially, you end up with the Covenant resuming its, original trip, the surviving crew members re-entering stasis, and then, as Walter is putting Daniels under, she finally realizes, like, holy shit, you're not Walters, you're David. Surprise! And he is like...
Well... Yeah, and by the way, this is also after another protomorph alien was, loose on their stupid ship.
And gets flushed into space, yes.
Yeah, and an also kind of ridiculous set of scenes as well.
She realizes, yeah, I'm kind of fast-forwarding through that big chunk. But essentially, alien shenanigans, aliens die, crew is, all getting ready to go to sleep. She realizes... but it's too late, and she falls asleep. So the film ends, and you've got David basically, throwing up, I guess. It was weird. Like, he's got these two embryos that are alien embryos. He places them in storage, kind of next to these human embryos. And then he essentially erases the ship's log, and, it kind of resets to where it started in the beginning. Where's he going? What's he doing? We don't know. How does this connect to Alien, the original? I don't know, but somehow in some way it does. So what are your thoughts on this? Do you feel like the film ends and like kind of wraps itself up, or is it just a big, huge cliffhanger?
This film doesn't end and wrap itself up. It's obviously a cliffhanger, but at least this film ends in a way that resolves this one story, that we're talking about. Now we know that David has this plan. He has his purpose. Where in the first film, I think David was kind of trying to figure out his purpose, and now I think that he's figured it out. He wants to create this. Obviously, we need some more explaining, because obviously it's David who created the eggs and the facehugger alien, and I think it's pretty obvious that he is the one, if not created the actual xenomorph, created the next creature that's really close to the xenomorph. So how did the engineers end up in possession of these things and were the ones who crash landed on the planet from the original Alien film? So this is where I think we need a couple more, right? We need 3. We need 2 or 3 at least, I think.
Well, yeah, I have lots of questions. I mean, I guess I would like to know how... We don't really know how it happened, but David essentially wipes out this, I'm assuming the entire race, or at least all of the engineers that are on this planet, with their own weapon. So how are they so easily bested? We don't know. And then he's, like I said earlier, he's experimenting, he's expressing an interest in creating, but he is creating. So I guess I just don't know what the final outcome is. And I'm also, the xenomorphs, the morphs, whatever they are, decamorph, monomorph, whatever they are. Every time you get one over the course of these 2 films, it begins to look more and more like you said, the alien that we, love and know. I guess with the host continuing to be human along the way, for the most part, right? For the most part, they're human. Why do they keep changing so dramatically? That's the part I'm confused about. And I guess I still don't understand. In the Alien trilogy, the original trilogy, you had a very set kind of like life cycle for the aliens. You started with an egg. Egg begets facehugger. Facehugger implants seed into host. Out of host burst xenomorph. That's kind of like all been set aside here, And so do you have any thoughts on that? Like, what am I missing with... It almost feels like the black goo is just kind of like this like indescribable, Superman thing that we can just do anything with.
I think that the idea that we're supposed to come to, at least this is the idea that I came to, was that this is designed, and they said it in Alien Covenant. This was designed to interact in a destructive fashion with pretty much any, the meat, so to speak, any biological living, creature, animals, humankind, engineers, everybody. The trend that I've noticed is that depending on the stage we're at, this black goo substance morphs and mutates things differently. For example, when it infects the worms, it makes the worms into these other giant worms, but these worms are designed now to infect another creature, for a la the humans. When these worms infect the two humans and Prometheus, they turn into, the one living one who didn't get burned alive turns into kind of just like a Destructitron zombie, right? Just going around messing stuff up. But he's kind of brought back to life in a zombie type way. When the black goo, though in a different fashion, is delivered into Shaw, in the form of sexual intercourse, or as we like to say, banging.
Yeah.
And then she births a creature from this. It's a different type of creature. It's now mutated differently because it was delivered differently into a different person in a different fashion. And then now this birth creature is designed to implant something into something else. And then from the next creature it touches, the engineer, out comes, from now we have something implanted into this next generation of version of the creature. Out comes this other alien, this thing that resembles our xenomorph alien. And I think that's just, we're supposed to see that this thing is being constantly played with. It's an unreliable, unstable biological weapon that, depending on what it comes in contact with and how it's delivered, begets like a different creature. Obviously, by the time they get to the planet in Alien Covenant, David has manipulated this to the point where he's obviously manipulated it through generations and generations and generations to create something else. And I think that's what he figured out. Everything that this touches is going to mutate differently. So I'm going to play around with this until it mutates something that I want.
So maybe he was able to get predictable results, which is why, when the Nostromo crew kind of finds what they find, it kind of has the same results over and over again over the course of those films.
Yeah. Now we have this one creature, the facehugger. There is no more black goo. The crew, but what we see in these three movies, or in these first two films, Alien, Covenant, Prometheus, is that this black goo is what's giving us different reactions every time it does something different or touches something different or gets delivered a different way. There is no black goo in the original Alien film. It's just the creature. This creature is going to do what it does, kind of every time it comes into contact with what it comes in contact with. Actually, that's not even necessarily true, because in Alien 3, when the facehugger gets a hold of the dog,
it becomes
the
like
alien
a dog
that comes from that. Yeah, it kind of mimics the thing that it came from. So I think that's what David was trying to do. He was trying to create something that he wanted this to be in a more predictable fashion.
Well, it's interesting, I guess. The thought I was having when I was watching this earlier was that, in the first film, the engineers seem like these godlike aliens, these almost indestructible genius gods, and the black goo is like the ultimate weapon. And they were seeding planets. They're obviously the progenitors of the entire universe. By the time I got to the end of this film, I kind of felt like, nope, they're really just another alien species. They probably didn't even invent the black goo. They just stumbled upon it, didn't know how powerful it was, and then ultimately had it used against them. And it's really interesting that David, this android, is now the true villain of these first two films, and is really much more godlike than the engineers. And my only disappointment. It's not disappointment. The engineers had a very specific kind of vibe to them in the first film, and then it's not the same vibe in the second film. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and also something very much to keep in mind, if you go to certain websites, especially alien-covenant.com, and you see some of these other rumors being reported by sources close to this film, the aliens in the opening of Prometheus, he might not have even been an engineer. He could have been the alien race that created the engineers. It's hard to know because, again, it's not something that they ever.
That's an interesting.
It's not like that
idea.
they ever really touched on it. Well, it's very clearly stated in some of these rumors that we're not necessarily supposed to get from that they are engineers. In fact, it's been hinted in a kind of a big broad fashion that it's that they've played with ideas that biblical events were actually manipulated by the creatures who maybe created us and the engineers, that kind of is there to transform worlds and manipulate ecosystems and things like that to kind of recreate planets and places that can support life and things like that. So it's very possible that there is something else that's kind of at work, and maybe that comes to intervene in some of the next films. But I don't think that I think that maybe we're supposed to be tricked, but I don't think that we're supposed to necessarily think that alien at the beginning was an engineer. And you're right. Here's a race that obviously knows how to seed worlds, and then we run into this other race that's kind of just as petty as us. I mean, it's kind of no wonder that someone like David's able to best them as well as us.
I think the other thing that I was thinking was, you're right that a lot of, like, even the term engineer, a lot of this stuff is coined by fans. It's been so open-ended or left kind of up to our imaginations. And now with the internet and such, it really does kind of take up on a life of its own. But it does feel like, from what I read, that Ridley Scott himself isn't, he's not like locking himself away. He is privy to some of the feedback, and that has somewhat manipulated it a little bit to where they wanted to go with the story, especially on this film. That being said, Carl, the way Alien Covenant ends, it's kind of like it could do anything in this next film. Are there any rumors? Do you have any ideas or thoughts on what they're going to do with film number 3?
I looked and looked and looked, and no. The only thing that I think that they might try to do with 3 is just based on all the unsubstantiated story fragments that maybe is in Ridley Scott's head that never came across, like the race that created us are possibly also responsible for a lot of biblical events that have been described. Mm-hmm. That they possibly created the engineers as well as us, and I kind of hope that some of that stuff's explored. Ultimately, what I want to know is what happens to Daniels, what happens to David, and I want to know how did the engineers or whatever creatures the space jockey was get a hold of the eggs with the face huggers? How did they get that away from David? I kind of want to know how that all leads together, and that's kind of the stuff that I really hope they explore in the next film, and I really hope that we don't have to wait 5 years for it.
Yeah, exactly, yes. And I mean, I think I thought, that the idea was that he wanted to do at least 2 more and was hoping to do 3 more after Prometheus. But, at 80 years old and with like kind of the way it's been working, yes, I hope he doesn't. I hope time is not on his side. So that being said, I'm very, very into this idea of like exploring, these kind of like almost biblical roots and all of that. I think that the films have opened up. It's doing what good science fiction should do, which is it's kind of touching upon a lot of different ideas, and it's leaving you with a lot of questions. Whereas Prometheus left me with questions and I was a little annoyed. This one left me with questions, but I felt satisfied. So I think the film in a lot of ways was a success. Carl, where do you put this film in the pantheon, in the lineup of Alien films? Where does this one sit for you?
It would compete with Alien 3 for me. I mean, overall, I thought it was a better film than Alien 3. Just from like a movie making standpoint, this was not an example of the studio getting in the way of things, so to speak. So maybe I didn't like the story. I thought the story for Alien 3 was better. I just think that they executed in this one just as a smidge better. But that being said, I like the story in Alien 3 more. So I think it would compete there for me if I kind of had to rank them. It's certainly better than Alien 4. It's certainly better than the Alien versus Predator films. And I certainly do think it's better than Prometheus.
Yeah, I am just going to have to say ditto. Like, I felt the same way. Like, it's going to be really hard to uproot the original Alien film because I feel like it's a scene-for-scene exercise in perfection. It's concise. The storytelling and pacing is perfect. And then Aliens, it's got the nostalgia effect. But I also think it's kind of a note perfect story. This film, there was definitely some issues. And I think what saves it from its issues is that, Prometheus got a lot out of the way. And so this movie was able to kind of start with a very interesting kind of premise. If I hadn't seen Prometheus and I had just watched this film on its own, I might not have enjoyed it as much. But because it had that foundation, I think they were able to get a little bit more adventurous with the storytelling. I think it's almost like a requisite that you've just got morons, in these films, and they do moronic things, and then they pay for it.
Yes.
There's a certain amount of, horror film, element to the first two Alien films that's really satisfying. Every mistake goes punished. And this film kind of brought back that. It's not...
Oh, yeah. I mean, how they got themselves in the predicament in the original Alien film was no smarter than what got them into their predicament in this one.
Well, and a lot of the there's a lot of red shirting going on in these films. You know from the start that okay, you're dead, as you meet the characters. And I don't know, I think this film did a good job of kind of echoing a lot of that without feeling like it was derivative. So hats off to them. I did not have high expectations. The trailer did not do the movie any justice because I feel like the trailer made it look like it was going to be a clusterfuck, but instead it was really just a well-paced, well-thought-out movie that maybe just wasn't compiled all that well into a trailer. So I'm glad I went and saw it in theaters when I had the chance. Do you have any desires or hopes for the next installment? Where do you want to see the story go?
I want to know how the aliens the engineers got a hold of the xenomorphs and the eggs. I want to know where David obviously goes wrong. David obviously goes wrong somewhere because he doesn't wipe out human race. He clearly doesn't wipe out the engineers because we see the engineers and the xenomorphs and the human race continuing on in films that are kind of far into the future. So I want to know, where does he mess up? He's the movie monster that I want to see more. And I don't want them to try to make the alien scary again because you can't. We've seen the alien shot dead. We've seen it blown up. We've seen it do the movie monster stalker thing. So that's gone. Stick to making an origin story. Stick to making a how this came to be story. Stick to making David the scariest part of these films because they're doing a really good job of that, and it would be a shame to lose it.
No, yeah, and I guess the other thing I'll say that I would like to see that after two prequels we still haven't seen, the ship the Nostromo kind of comes upon that has a engineer sitting in the pilot's seat with his chest burst open and a whole bunch of eggs in the bottom hatch. I would just love to know what ship that is. It's obviously not the ship that you see in Alien Covenant. Or is it? You just don't know. You know what I mean? And that's the part I would like to see, is how I would like whether it's the next film or in two films, I want to see it connect to that. Because ever since I originally saw Alien, I've been having that question. Where does that come from? And we're getting there in a long-winded way. So I think that, the film otherwise is pretty amazing. I want to read to you over on RogerEbert.com. Matt Seitz wrote a review of the film. He gave it 4 stars. I want to read you the final paragraph of his review because I think it says it kind of sums up a lot of what we've said, but very eloquently. He writes, "This is one of Scott's best directed movies and one of his most entertaining overall. Partly because he's working in a genre, the science fiction spectacle, that he does better than anyone since Stanley Kubrick." Wow, that's high praise. But also because he seems to be approaching it almost entirely in terms of visceral impact and emotion, as a symphony of blood and fire, poetry, and schlock. The best sequences, in particular the spore infestation that brings us inside an ear canal, the first attack in the grass, and the flute scene, the flashback revealing the city's destruction and the escape from the planet, put nearly everything else being done in science fiction or fantasy at this budget level to shame. It's rare to see such a combination of technical mastery and wicked joy in a film by a director who's been working as long as Scott. This is the third best Alien movie after the first two, but don't be surprised if repeat viewings kick it up a notch. I mean, that kind of says it all. And he's right. I mean, in terms of like going to the movies and seeing going and seeing a film in 2017, like what other science fiction film is giving you this caliber? It doesn't exist. So.
Oh, and out of any science fiction film I've seen, I don't know, maybe the last 10 years, this is certainly the best one.
And
at least of like big major releases, like in a
and
theater.
Prometheus was good too. Prometheus was great. I slept on Prometheus. I didn't see it in theaters when it came out. I should have. I will not sleep on the next Alien film. My last question for you is somewhat related to this, but I just really want to know, do you have thoughts on the new Blade Runner? Have you seen the now obviously Ridley Scott's not directing it, but have you seen the trailer? Are you excited at all?
I have not seen the trailer. I'm excited to see it. I avidly don't want to see a trailer for it. I just want to go into the film and see it fresh completely. Have you seen the trailer?
Yes, the original trailer for Blade Runner that ran in theaters, nearly 40 years ago. There you can just Google like Blade Runner trailer. They took the 2.5 minute trailer, and second for second created a trailer that essentially was an inversion of the trailer from then. So like it's the same trailer, but with all new characters, and where Harrison Ford is in the original trailer, he's in this trailer, but now he's 40 years older. It looks so good. It looks so interesting. The gentleman, I forget his name, but the guy who directed Arrival is the guy who's directing this, and it just looks note perfect. I'm super excited. I'm bummed out that Ridley Scott is not involved, but I'm still, it's just like when we talk about Ridley Scott films, it's Blade Runner is just one of those, was so ahead of its time, in a lot of ways. So I'm very excited to see it.
Yeah, I know Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford doesn't tend to talk a lot about, I think, films that are being made. He said that he thinks this movie's going to be absolutely fantastic. So I'm excited to see it for sure.
That's awesome. All right, man. Any parting thoughts on these Alien prequels?
Yeah, the shower scene in Alien Covenant was horribly stupid.
Let's end on the chat.
Yeah, a horror movie cliche that we could have done without completely.
Yeah, and I'll say that the best thing I can say about Prometheus is that, how do you say her last name? It's Numi Rapace. I don't know how to say her name.
Numi, I don't know. She's the hot chick.
She is so hot. She is so good in Prometheus in a lot of ways, and kind of plays like the anti-Ripley. And I think that I was so bummed out that she wasn't in Alien Covenant for like 10 minutes. And I just hats off to this cast, because you almost forget about her almost immediately. And it doesn't take anything away from her, because she's amazing, and I'm just bummed out they couldn't figure it out. But they figured it out. They cast the movie really well. You don't often get a franchise like this where you can kind of switch leads over and over again and have it still carry weight. In fact, I'm struggling to think of any movie franchise where that's happened, other than like James Bond, like where you can like literally insert new cast here and just have it still carry weight. But they've managed to do it. And I was worried that Michael Fassbender being the only carryover, was going to not make any sense. But no, he's fantastic, and it makes absolute sense. And that dude is... Yeah, I have a lot of respect for him as an actor. He owned this movie.
Yes, absolutely.
He might be the scariest villain of all time.
If you were to ask me to make a list of movie monsters and some of my favorite ones, he'd at least be contending in the top 10.
Yeah, what's interesting too is he was in that, he did last year's The Light Between Oceans, which I don't know if you've seen it. It was more of an indie film, but it was a movie based on a book, and essentially he plays a lighthouse keeper. He tends to a lighthouse, and he marries this woman, and he's kind of a really quiet guy because he's a veteran, and he's all kind of scarred from being in war. And this character that he plays in Alien is like the antithesis of that character. And it's so jarring because they look identical. Like, it's the same look, same hair. And it's so jarring. And I cannot believe, like, I would never say, like, he's one of the best actors I've ever seen because he plays both roles so convincingly. But it is such a spectrum. I really can't think of anybody who's done something like that, because it's like villain to hero, you know? Good for him.
Yeah, he's absolutely, yeah. I figured that I'll take as many films a season that I could get these days. He proved himself certainly to be an amazing actor. Thank you for listening to Geek USA. Follow us on Twitter at Geek USA Podcast.